Hi, Sally Foley-Lewis here with another amazing senior leader talking all things self-leadership. So welcome to the Spark Self-Leadership video series. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to be hanging out with Josh Grocke, who is the head of account management with Flight Centre Business Travel. G'day, Josh.
Thanks for having me along today, Sally. It's a pleasure to join you as always.
Look, I really appreciate you being able to spend some time with me because we're still in a pandemic when we record this, but I would just love to get some insights from you and how it's impacted the self-leadership of you and your team. But before we go down that rabbit hole, tell me a little bit about Flight Centre, just in case there's at least maybe one, possibly some individual on this planet who doesn't know what Flight Centre is.
Flight Centre, leading travel provider, globally now. Lots of different brands in the company, lots of different angles, from being that leisure space, premium space, retail, corporate, technology. 99 bikes. There's all sorts of parts of Flight Centre these days. And look, no one's going to sugarcoat the fact that Flight Centre is involved in the travel industry, which has been, significantly challenged in the last year. But I think that we need to look at the fact that, Flight Centre is a fortunate company. We're fortunate to work for such a great company. It's been a time in everyone's life across the world, which is, something we thought we'd never expect. And I think that there's all sorts of stories out there that have been difficult. But working for Flight Centre, I've worked at Flight Centre for almost 17 years. My wife worked at Flight Centre, my daughter, my son-in-law. So if anyone's an endorsement for the company of Flight Centre, it's probably me. But yeah, for us at the moment, we've gone through a sort of quite a big restructure, quite a lot of changes. But I think the thing for me that comes out is that we've just kept the human element. And for mine, one of the things that Flight Centre tries and strives to do best is that really, remember that there is a human side to all business. There's a human side to all sort of industry. And I think that that's what the pandemic's really brought forward, not just in Flight Centre, but just for all of us.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate hearing that, not because you do see these big brands and you wonder, don't you? Because you're someone on the outside, not on the inside. So like you are. So it warms my heart to actually hear that, because not everyone's doing well and not everyone's come out of this or coming out of this well. So to hear that is really cool and really it restores my faith. So that's good news. So that's great. And speaking of the human, let me use that as a segue into what do you call, or how would you define self-leadership?
I think it comes down to having sort of a framework of boundaries and expectations with your own values. I think you've sort of got to look at what gets us up out of bed in the morning and what are you trying to strive for and achieve for. And for a lot of people, it's things like, family and I guess there's also that drive to self-develop yourself and sort of move forward in a career. And people could talk about money and all the rest of it. But for mine, it's very much it's having a discipline that sort of talk to your boundaries and expectations. I've got an expectation of what I need to have around my work and my career and my life. But I've also come to realize over the years that if you don't have a disciplined sort of approach to it, it pretty much falls by the wayside. And I guess that's kind of what I see as that self-leadership. There's times when you want feedback from others, and there's times you've got to find that drive within yourself.
Yeah. And I like that. I think that understanding that sometimes no matter how much you're looking to the external, it has to come from within at times. And I really like that distinction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's setting up some structures. I think that the word sort of around, motivation and drive and that sort of thing, they're great ideas, but you've got to structure it that it's going to work for you. Just because a framework for motivation works for someone else, it might not work for you. I'm not a big rah-rah person, so I don't need sort of cheerleaders on the sideline to motivate me, but that might work for someone else. So you just got to find your framework and your structure. That's what I think works best for, I guess, that drive and that self-discipline and self-leadership.
Yeah. And talking about understanding that or creating that structure for yourself and what works for you. I'm reading between the lines here is that you've got to know yourself. So your self-awareness is so important.
Yeah, it is. And I think that I work a lot with our teams on the art of saying no. It's important to say yes when you can, but it's also important to set boundaries. And I think for myself, I need to, check in with myself a lot of the time and sort of say, where am I at? Why am I, say, getting frustrated or flustered with a situation? Is it the other person or is it me? If it's me, maybe I need to set boundaries, or maybe I need to look at it from a different angle. So I think that's important. I think setting boundaries is one of the critical parts. So often we see these amazing people in business in particular who just keep trying to take on more and more and more and more, and they're usually fantastic operators. But then you sort of see them drown because they're just, they don't know how to sort of say no, or how to prioritize, or how to, set these expectations with people about, timelines. So yeah, I think it's really important.
Yeah, and that example you give, it makes the red flag for me is, why are they saying yes? What's under, I want to rip open or pull out the onion layers and say, if they don't have boundaries, why don't they have boundaries? What's the driver for saying yes? And then the question then is, where's their self-leadership at? Are they misaligned with their values? Are they being driven by a fear that's actually a perception? And does that need to be sort of course corrected as such? So
I couldn't agree more, Sally. I think that that's a really critical part. It's sort of it's the why. It's sort of a lot of the time for myself, I know when I'm getting in a situation, I'm getting overwhelmed. I have to look at it and sort of say, but what's happening here? Get curious. Like, why is that happening? You know what you're doing. You're good at your job, but this isn't working for you. Well, maybe you need to come at a different angle or a different approach, or delegate. Delegate's a great one. So yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, I love that. Get curious. And this is a journey, isn't it? This is our self-leadership. I don't think ever finishes. I don't imagine that you get to a certain age and you go, well, that's it. I'm done. I'm self-actualized. This is as good as it gets. And if you have got to that and think that, then we need to have a chat. But yeah.
And I think that you need to, for me, it correlates across, it's not just my career, it's across all parts of your sort of life. I think that anyone who can compartmentalize it from their career to their family to their outside interests and things, I think it's sort of you're cutting yourself a bit short. I think you've got to sort of look at it and go, well, the self-leadership needs to be, and how do I encompass my whole life as well as instead of just your career?
Yeah, totally. And well, which lends itself to that whole point about your emotions. And sometimes, I've sort of some leaders who would say, and I don't know if I'm using the term leaders loosely on that one, would say, leave your emotions at home. And it's like, well, how do I get them out of me and leave them on the kitchen table? We can't. And I think that lens, I'm stretching from your point to that, because it's about being, your emotional intelligence. You need to be aware of your emotions, and therefore as one thing, and then being able to regulate your emotions. And so they come with you. All of you has to go to work, and all of you has to be at home. So
I think that it was something that we'd often spoken about before the pandemic, about the ability to be vulnerable in the workspace. I think that's something that's, always, I think it's something you need to look at. I remember the days when you were told to leave your emotions at the door. So that was when I sort of started in Flight Centre a long time ago now. But I guess the thing that the pandemic sort of really brought to the fore is that you need to be vulnerable. You need to let your emotions be there. I've had heartbreaking phone calls with businesses that have hit the wall in the last year. They've been long-term clients of ours. I've also had, conversations with clients where they've been able to, get back from a ridiculous situation, and together we've been able to solve it, for example. So I think that what the pandemic's shown is that it's that human element. I think that there's still going to be a cutthroat business world in some areas, but I think more and more we're seeing that empathetic type relationship building is becoming critical and key to business. And even over Zoom is a great thing, but a lot of the time you need to sort of go beyond that. You need to be able to show your emotion as opposed to just be a robot.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And finding ways down the lens to be able to do that it's challenging, but it's not impossible. And I think that, look, I'm not a marketer. I mean, you're obviously probably a better marketer than me, but to me, there's that whole concept of the know, like, then trust, then buy economy. I've heard that a lot over the, sort of pre-pandemic, but hasn't that been ramped up when I know you and I like you and I trust you because we've actually gone another layer deeper, and with that vulnerability and with that relationship building and even just being present that little bit more.
And that's exactly it. It's those sort of things that in the past over the years, I think they were nice to have. I think that the words were bandied around, and it was a nice to have in business if you could have it. Whereas now it's becoming a real non-negotiable. You need to have you need to be present. You need to be empathetic. You need to be transparent. You need to, give that to people, because otherwise they see it as a transactional type scenario. And I think we're moving away from that transactional type relationship,
which I think is a blessing, and I think we can only benefit from it, can't we? So yeah,
sure. I think that the transactional side, if nothing else, it's pretty mundane.
Well, yeah, tick, done, move on. Where's the experience of it? Where's the ability to have a good banter and just even just to lighten someone's day just for 5 minutes is, can mean a lot.
I think what you said there, the experience of it, embrace the experience. I mean, we've been through roller coaster rides with some of our clients, but I think some of the most empowering things have been when things have gone wrong, and we've been able to be on the journey with them to hopefully come out the other end. And I think that, I guess, us as a account management team, for example, we've talked a lot about embracing the journey. We're not out of the woods yet. We're in travel. we're in a very interesting place still. But it's been about embracing that journey and going on those experiences with people. And, when we've had people on the phone crying to us, it's not because they're, you've got to show some empathy. You can't just sort of be a robot and try to sort of say, oh, well, too bad, so sad. I think that might have been a way business was done 30, 40 years ago, but I think it's not the way forward.
That's right. Yeah. And you talked about vulnerability. So I wanted to just go from that to some other elements of leadership, if we can. And thinking about, as a leader, we often need to put on display or at least have some modicum of confidence, courage, and some influence. And I'm wondering about your thoughts on the impact of self-leadership on elements such as confidence, influence, and courage.
I think it comes down to you've got to sort of lead by example in some way, shape, and form. So that self-leadership sort of thing, you need to impart that on other people. And I guess for me, I talk about boundaries and expectations a lot, because I've got them for me within how I do my role and how I sort of conduct myself. And then I guess when someone in my team's challenged, I'll sort of always press back on, well, where are your boundaries with this person, or where are your boundaries with this situation? So for me, the self-leadership comes from having those boundaries and expectations, but then you've got to revisit it. It's not a set and forget type scenario. So if someone comes along and thinks that with either self-leadership or leading a team, that they can just have a once a month meeting or a once every 3 months meeting, set a few expectations and boundaries, and then off you go. It's check-in. It's you've got to communicate. You've got to talk to people. You've got to check in with them. You've got to. It's a constant reinforcement. So I guess for me personally, in self-leadership, it's very much a set the boundaries and expectations, and then the constant reinforcement, and then that sort of extrapolates onto how I lead teams.
And it shows you as a confident leader, and then also about how you can influence others. And I think it's a very clear link between them. And I totally agree with you. When the minute you set a boundary, something will try to test it. And I think your point about it's not set and forget is absolutely true. And I think also sometimes there will be situations that arise where you actually have to say, okay, well, I have this boundary, but I can see that I need to, loosen it in this instance. And it's how you handle that with courage and conviction to say, in this instance, I'll loosen it, but we need to make sure we address this differently next time?
Oh, and I couldn't agree more, Sally. I mean, it speaks to courage, and what it really is that you've got to have the courage to be vulnerable, because you can set all the boundaries and expectations in the world, but if you're rigid in your thinking, I think you've got to be able to challenge your boundaries, you've got to be able to challenge your expectations and make sure they're robust. But you also need to be in a position where you can actually say, no, that's a better point of view than I had, or that's a different angle, or things have changed. We need to be agile. You're actually right, Sally. I think that's the thing that takes real courage. The courage to be able to change your mind or have someone change your mind. That takes a long time to learn. But I'd say that's the sort of thing that that's where you've got to look inside yourself, and it speaks to what you say about the self-leadership. You need to be able to look inside yourself and say, what are my values? What are the reasons for me doing this? I say to my team a lot of the time, I don't know everything. And so I think you've got to be courageous enough to have your opinions change, your values change. I think one of the fantastic things we've seen over the last few years about some of the votes and referendums we've had, I've seen people change their mind. And I think it's really powerful when people can look inside themselves, have some courage, and they may have set some boundaries and expectations in their life, but they're also had the courage to change them. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a great example about what's happening with our voting and our referendum. I think that's, yes, exceptionally good example. Thank you for sharing that and reminding me. Yeah. So when you've had your self-leadership sort of dented a bit, or the flame has been dampened down a bit, and you can use COVID if you want, or there may be some other example, and you don't necessarily have to share the story, but what I'd love to know, and what I'd love for you to share is, how did you identify it first and foremost, and then how did you go about, reigniting your self-leadership? Like, what were the lessons?
I find this is an interesting one, because the self part of it can become a little bit insular if you only keep it to yourself. I think for my self-leadership, I find I do lean on networks. So I'll check with people I trust, whether it's in business or family or whatever it may be, to sense check where I'm at and what I'm thinking. Because I think that it's all well and good for things like self-leadership to be self-driven. But I think eventually sometimes you've got to sense check it with others, because otherwise you can get too much in your own head. And I guess for me, it's a case of sort of saying, if I sense check it with someone I trust, then I guess I can come back to myself and say, okay, you've checked whether this is where the situation's at. Okay, now how do you need to motivate yourself to get back to where you want to get to? Sometimes it's not easy. The COVID period's been a really interesting sort of a piece. But again, I guess you look at your values and what you're trying to achieve. And again, why you get up out of bed and go to work in the morning, that's got to be a self-driven, self-leadership sort of side of things, I think.
Yeah. So when you say sense, what did you say, sense check?
Yeah, sense check.
So tell me what that is. Give me an example or what you mean by that, your definition of that.
For me, sense checking is a bit of an interesting one. It could be a bit of a buzzword, I suppose. The way that I think sense checking is that if I've got an idea that I think, and even as a team, we've talked about it, but that's in our world. So say in the account management world, or in leadership, even that if I've got a theory, but then you need to put it to someone that's in a different area or in a different sort of mindset. So it may be that you're a leader and you want one of your team to just make sure that it's not coming from a leadership angle, or if us in account management need to talk to the operations department and find out if, just because we think it's right, we need them to sort of make sure it's right on that side as well. And I find sense checking is quite a good thing to do, because often it's that final thing before you go ahead with something. Okay, we've done all this planning, we've done all this idea making, but will it actually work in the real world?
Yeah, I love it. It's, all the ideas in the world are great, but will they actually work? So it's about testing it, and yeah, I love it. Thank you. So what about your team? Sorry, go on. Sorry, go on.
We see so many things fall in the real world. It sounds great in theory, but would it actually work in the real world? Yeah, totally. And my head just went to all those strange inventions that you see on like Korean and Japanese inventions, and like the toilet paper roll that comes down to blow. That's where my head just went. So
Yeah. I have way too much stuff going on up here right now, but I love it. It keeps me entertained.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, what about the team though? Like, how do you help your reports and your team members keep their self-leadership sparked up?
I'm big on empowerment. And again, I know I've been saying this a lot, but setting boundaries and expectations. So I like to empower people with their sort of, I guess, their knowledge. I'll always, I think you've got to balance it up with being, giving them the trust and empowerment, but also giving them support. So you can't just sort of let someone adrift for a month, but you also don't want to be in their face micromanaging them every 5 minutes. Because I find that, and you've got to balance it up with the individual as well. But then I find that if you give them that sort of trust and empowerment, it sparks them to understand, well, what am I going to need to do to get myself going? And there's got to be some structures in place. I don't think you need to have overarching micromanaging type structures, but you've got to give someone some structure and boundaries so then they can find their way to self-leader or self-lead.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I love that. And I think it's about, you know, when you can say to your people, what do you need from me to help you do the best you can do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that because everyone's different personalities too, and everyone's got different drivers. We've been talking a lot about, some people are how people, some people are why people, some people are what people. And when you've got one of each in your team, you've got to kind of figure out which way to frame things up.
Get a little matrix on the keep a little who's who in the zoo here, and how do I communicate with all of them? But I totally get that, because you've got to meet people where they're at. But also, I think when you step back and look at your team, the fact that you've got a nice diverse range, then that complements that as a team perspective. Yeah.
And that's sort of critical for mine when you're building a team. I think you've got to look at what are people going to bring that's going to be different to what you've already got. The last thing we need is 4 or 5 or 10 people that are basically the same style of person, because otherwise we're not going to get dynamic answers. So I think it's important when you're sort of team building, not to just fill the role, but how is that person going to fit into the team and fit into the brand and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I remember an experience with an old boss who actually brought in someone, and we all complained. We were not happy, and we told her about it as well. And then she shut us down real quick, because she said, before you go on any further and tear any more strips off me, you need to know this. This team is missing this, it's missing this, it's missing this. And this person brings all three. Go on. And we just... it was gold. I mean, she could see what was missing, and she brought that in, and it was just brilliant.
It's such a good, but see, that's for me is just amazing leadership, because it takes that courage to be able to go, okay, I might upset the dynamic of the team as it was, but what am I going to have in the future? And I think that not only will that team thrive, but the individuals in that team will thrive as well.
And we did, I think because this person was a customer or a client and then turned into a teammate, we only had one certain experience of that person. Right. And so her sharing what gaps this person was filling really opened our eyes up, and it was the best experience. I mean, it was many, many years ago, but I haven't forgotten it, obviously. So I
love that. That's a really good leadership example.
Yeah, definitely. I've been one of my good leaders that I've had, so I've been very blessed to have some great leaders. And some that I've learned from is all I'll say. We've all had maybe one of those. So, yeah. Hey, what's one thing you wish you knew about self-leadership when you first stepped into a leadership role?
I'd say it's more around that sort of vulnerability, courage type sort of a thing. I think you've got to be... When you, I've been in leadership for a long time, so it takes me a while to remember back.
You're only 21, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well said. I think the thing for mine though is that you often have pictures in your own mind, even if you've been to university, you've done courses about what a leader should be, and you feel as though you've been given this role and you should be able to solve a lot of problems yourself. So you don't necessarily know, when to reach out. But again, I found it difficult when I first started as a leader to set boundaries. I'd say yes to everyone. I'd be like, yep, I can do that, because I'm the man. I'm doing it. I'm the leader. And then eventually you realize that doesn't really work. One of the things I got taught quite well early on is that, how to delegate properly, not just to dump work on people, but how to delegate and empower. And I think that was the sort of stepping stone for me to start to work towards, okay, well, how do I develop my own self-leadership? Because, delegating properly isn't easy. And it needs to be done correctly. And that was where I sort of moved away from having to be the leader, the big guy, whatever, and to more being around, well, I'm just a facilitator, really. I'm just a facilitator for the team. I can show the way sometimes, but I can empower you. I can delegate to you. You've got to have a lot of strings to your bow, I think, in leadership. And when you first start out in it, you just kind of want to be all things to all people, but you realize that that's not really possible.
Yeah, definitely. And you burn out if you don't. So,
that's exactly right. You burn out, and you also you lose your sort of passion. And if you draw it back to self-leadership, you sort of lose your way.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So, look, thank you so much for sharing some time with us and your insights into self-leadership. Josh, any final words you'd like to share? Last words.
Oh, I think leadership's thrust upon some people, and some people sort of strive for it. But I think that anyone can be a leader, but I think you've just got to, bring a human quality to it. There's going to be times when you need to, do what the business needs you to do. But I think if you fall back on a human element most of the time, you're probably going to get the best results.
Yeah. So keep it real, keep it human, vulnerability, expectations, and boundaries. So thank you, Josh. Really appreciate you, and thank you for your time.
No problems at all. Thanks, Ali.
There's been another episode of the Spark Self-Leadership video series with the amazing self-leaders such as Josh Grocke, who is the head of account management with Flight Centre Business Travel. Thanks, and catch you next time.